Harrington here from Downshift. Thank you all for tuning in. We're going to give you a little bit of time to get settled in. We said 3, it's 3:01, but we'll give you a few minutes. Just a disclaimer about this. 1, it's our first attempt at a virtual class, so please be patient with us. 2, it is meant to be engaging. So please ask questions. Steve is on the other side of the camera, and he's going to be relaying questions to me. Interrupt me, ask questions. It looks like somebody's already engaging. Val, thank you, Val, for being here. It means a lot to me. As we all know, small businesses are doing whatever they can to stay engaged with their customer base during this odd time, and we have seen so many people, so much of the Roanoke community either come out, grab stuff to go, or purchase gift cards online. We even had someone purchase a gift card online and just tell us to donate that gift card to someone who needs it. So we have seen our community show up, and it really does mean a lot to us. It's been a stressful week, I think, for everybody. So hopefully this will provide a little bit of reprieve. The class is meant to help you learn how to fix the flat. So if you're following along with your bicycle and a tire, wheel, tube, that would be the most helpful way to approach this class. If you are not, you still hopefully will learn something. This class is going to be helpful for anyone who's interested in cycling. And if you have kids at home, if there's any kids who are out of school and looking to learn, I thank you all for joining us today as well. Any questions so far?
Val says she is wearing the same t-shirt, so it's awesome.
Solidarity. Thank you. I put this t-shirt on 3 minutes ago, so I appreciate it. Okay.
We have 12 viewers, which is awesome.
Okay, thank you all. 12 viewers. Great. So the things we're going to go over today, and I'm using my little cheat sheet using our State Farm Dan Presley sponsored Post-it note, is we're going to go over correct tube size and terminology, some tools that you'll need in order to fix a flat, how to properly remove the tire from your rim, how to identify the source of the flat, the issue. That is a step that many people skip, and then you might end up in the same boat that you were just in if you get a flat. And then, of course, the reinstallation. So I'm going to go ahead and get started because it seems like everybody who might be tuning in is here. If not, people can obviously join as we go on. But let's start. We have our quick release lever here, so I'm going to disengage the wheel from the bicycle. And if right now this tire, this tube is not flat, but if it were, if I was out on a ride and discovered that my tire was flat, probably some steps before that would be knowing that I have the right tube with me. So you can see every tire should be stamped with the correct size. So here we have 700 by 28C. That is telling me the size tube that I need to go inside of this tire, which is not tubeless. So if you have a tubeless setup, this video is not for you. If you have a tube setup where you have a tire with a tube inside of it, then this is how you would identify the correct size. 700 is going to be the diameter of the wheel, and 28 is the width. So the width here. And so if I was coming into Downshift, I of course could ask someone for the correct size if I have my tire with me. If not, I could go directly to the tubes and see 700, and usually there is a range. So I have 700 and then 18 to 25. So that means that this tube would be acceptable for a 700C diameter wheel and then 18 to 25 being the width. So there is a range there, and this tire and tube fall at the top end of that width. The other thing I'm taking into consideration is the valve. So this is a Presta valve, which is shown on the box, and that tells me I need a Presta valve. You can use a Presta valve on a Schrader drilled rim, but for the most part we try to keep these with the correct rim. And so I have here the Presta valve. It has a nut on top that goes in and out. And let's see, do we have a Schrader? I guess we can just grab a box there. Here, to compare and contrast, we have a 28-inch diameter tube, and it's like 28 by 1 3/8, or 700 by 35 to 47. And this is going to be a Schrader or more auto. This is what you would see on your vehicle. It's what you might see a lot on a more mountain bike or 26-inch tire, and maybe even like a stroller. We see a lot of strollers come in. And here's kind of some comparisons. The most common that we see are Presta and Auto. So it is important to know what your bike has. All right, so after I've identified that, as you can see behind us, there's many, many different sizes of tires. So that's why if you go into a bike shop, it's important to know, because one size definitely does not fit all, and you will feel more confident and feel better about making your purchase and about working on your bike if you know what size tubes your tire takes. All right, some terminology that I want to go over. One of my pet peeves, but very, very, very common mistake, and I even find myself making it sometimes, is referring to the parts of this wheel with incorrect terminology. So we have the rubber part that is on the outside is going to be your tire, and then the tube goes inside of the tire, which sits on the rim of the wheel. So that was kind of a quick explanation, but we have our wheel. Sometimes we refer to the whole thing as the wheel, and the wheel is made up of a hub, spokes, a rim, and then we have our tire with the tube inside. So all of that's going to be helpful, because most of the time, if you get a flat, you are just going to need to replace the tube. Occasionally, if it's a bad enough flat, perhaps a tear in the sidewall, or you've hit something so intense that you actually need to replace the whole tire, which would be the rubber exterior, but most of the time it's just the tube. So if you walk into a bike shop, you might say, I have a flat and I need a new tube, or I need a tube replaced, and then that will get us kind of going in the right direction. So if this were flat, do we have any questions about terminology or size?
People say yay terminology, so they're grateful of the terminology.
Great, cool. I find that knowing the correct names of all the different parts of the bike is just empowering and provides context. So I like to share that information with everyone. But I'm going to show you how, now that this is flattened a little bit, if I take my fingers, and what I did there is I broke the bead. So the makeup of a tire, and I'll take one off of here, and this is a wire bead. You can see like all of this is flexible, but then there's a bead that goes all the way around, and that is what kind of gives the tire structure, and that tire bead fits into the edge of the rim. So the rim is shaped like this, and what I did is the bead would run in those wells on the side of the rim, and what I did by pressing it is I released it from that edge. And that's helpful if I do that all the way around, and if I do it on both sides. You can see that's pretty obvious, right, that it kind of removed, if you could hear that from your computer or phone. What that does is it really makes it easier for me to remove the tube from inside, because now you can see the tire is much looser on that rim. Okay, now I have my tire levers here. These are not mine, these belong to the shop, although I have the same ones, and they are great tire levers. They are Pedros tire levers, and we like these. They are very difficult to break. So this is a great tool to have on you.
Amy asks, how difficult is it to break the bead typically?
It shouldn't be hard to break the bead. The hardest part is getting it back on. And so I'll share some tips and tricks of how to get it back on. But with my tire levers, I'm going to start opposite of the valve. On a tube, there's a lot of mass where the valve is attached to the tube, and it makes it difficult to remove the tire bead off of the rim by that valve. So if I start on the opposite side, you can see I almost don't even need the tire lever. I can just pull under there and release the bead. And so I'm only going to do that on one side. The other bead is left in the middle of that rim on this side. So now I have one side, and what I can do is snake out the tube on that side. There we go. Tube, tire. Now this stays on there. All right, so I didn't have to use my tire levers. You might have to if the bead is very, very tight on that rim. Now that I have my tube, if I were out in the wild and didn't have a floor pump, it makes everything a lot harder. So if you're new to this, it's helpful to start in the comfort of your home using your floor pump. I'm going to use my floor pump to put some air into the tube. The reason I do this is so I can identify the issue. If you don't identify the issue, then you don't know what to fix. So, as this is not a tube that has been punctured, it is holding air. But if I were putting air into the tube and air was coming out somewhere, I would do my best to go use my hands or even hold it up to my face because your cheek is more sensitive than your hands to try to find where that air is coming out of. And there's a few different issues that could have happened. One very common issue would be called a pinch flat. And a pinch flat, if I'm looking at the tube, right, it would be shaped like this. A pinch flat typically are two parallel elongated holes that run next to each other. And those are caused when you have kind of two situations. One of the situations would be too low of tire pressure. So you can imagine if I'm running too low of a tire pressure, the tube actually would get pinched between the rim and the tire. So if the tube were to get pinched, it would form two perfect parallel lines right next to each other on the tube.
Typically on the inside.
Yeah, typically on the inside. So I'd be looking kind of here on the inside. So it could be too low of tire pressure. The second issue is really you hit something super, super, super hard. So let's say you dropped off of a curb. Even if you were running the appropriate tire pressure, you still can get a pinch flat. Knowing the appropriate tire pressure we'll get to when we reinstall. All right, so that's one reason you might get a flat. A second reason you might get a flat is simply a puncture. So if I were to see one hole somewhere in the exterior of the tube, so running along the outside, a single hole or maybe a grouping of something, but it's not that pinch flat that looks like a snake bite, that would tell me something is caught in the tire potentially. I ran over something, perhaps we've seen like metal filaments, we've seen glass, I don't know, a screw, an entire screw we pulled out, which is luckily easily to identify. The hard ones are those tiny, tiny shards of metal. But whoever installed this tire, the factory where it came from, did something really smart. What they did is they put the words on the tire right where the valve is lined up. And why that's helpful is I have the valve here, I have my tube, and let's pretend I had a puncture on this side. I know now that there's something in the tire, maybe around here or here within the tire. So of course I can check the entire tire by running my hand on the inside, which does have its risks if there's something sharp in it. I can also visually inspect, but by using kind of the location in comparison to the valve, it really sends me down a better path in looking for what's wrong. So if I find something that's sticking in, I want to do my best to remove it the way it came in. So I would remove it this way. If I were to pull it through the other side, could potentially cause a larger hole or a bigger issue. So I try to remove it out this way. And that's when you can find it. Sometimes we do get a situation where we simply cannot find something in the rubber of the tire. And when that happens, we kind of have to gamble and put a new tube in and see if it holds. Or we assume that whatever you ran over didn't stick inside of the tire. Or it could be embedded really, really deeply and be very small. So there are issues of reoccurring flats that could be caused by something like that, and all mechanics do their best to find and identify the issue, but of course there are times when it's just incredibly difficult to do so. All right, so a pinch flat, a puncture, and then I would say another really common one is the tube getting pinched around this valve, and that happens because we have so much buildup of mass there that the tube doesn't get pushed up inside of the tire, and that leads to a pinch. So that's just another common one. And then another issue could just be a faulty valve, perhaps a faulty tube, a faulty valve. These are obviously mass produced, and every once in a while you get something where there's just an issue. With the Presta valve, perhaps the top of it isn't installed all of the way, so we need to use a tool to tighten that down. What are some other issues I might be missing? Anything?
No, the valve core one is a good one. Yeah, that's one that can be a mystery for a lot of people.
Yeah, the valve core can happen maybe when you were putting the head of your pump. When you were installing this, you bent or broke that little top part of the Presta valve. We see that sometimes where you're just not as familiar with your pump, you're using it for the first time, or you're just having a difficult time getting it on there, and then that bends and breaks. It is kind of a fragile piece there. All right, so that covers removal and identification. Are there any questions so far?
Shout out to Jeff Tabak.
Thanks, Jeff Tabak, for tuning in. I hope Ralphie's doing good. All right, so now let's pretend this is a new tube with no issues, which it is a tube with no issues, hopefully. I am going to put some air inside of the tube to give it some shape. And the reason I'm going to do that is it makes it easier when I'm installing it to have a little bit of shape. If it were totally empty of air, you could potentially get a bend or a overlap in the tube when you're installing it, and then that's obviously going to lead to issues. So I'm going to ensure that there's some writing by my valve to make it easier, and then the side that the bead is off of, I'm going to peel it back and insert the tube, and then push the tube up and inside of the tire all the way around. And as I'm doing this, I will take some air out of the tube. And remember, with the Presta valve, in order to take out air or take air out of the tube or put air back in, this nut has to be unscrewed all the way to the top. If it were screwed down, I couldn't put air in or take air out. So making sure that's all the way unscrewed. So now you can see I have the tube tucked up inside of the tire, and as I mentioned before, it is the most difficult to take off the bead and put it back on at the valve. So this time I'm going to start there. So I'm going to work my way around, slowly putting the bead back onto the rim. And this is where, at the end, it can get difficult. Luckily, I don't think this one's going to be very hard, but Amy, to answer your question, this is where it can be challenging. And I have, we've had to, at times use 3 people to put a tire onto a rim. So don't feel bad if this is difficult for you. It is commonly difficult for people, but there are some ways to make it easier. One of those is by breaking the bead all the way around like we did in the beginning. That makes it so that the tire is sitting inside the deepest well of the rim, making it looser in sense. So it makes it easier to apply. Starting at the valve when putting it back on is also another way to make that easier. And then I kind of, as I was putting it on, you can see I'm squeezing and I'm also pulling. So I'm trying to pull as much of the mass of that tire towards the end as possible to put it on. That makes it a lot easier. And I'm also trying to use this kind of the meatiest, hardiest part of my hand, not just my thumbs or using my fingertips. I'm using my whole hand and I'm rolling the tire onto the rim like that. was way too easy. It usually is a lot harder than that. So, but those are some tips that other people didn't know before, and when I've taught classes before, they said that that alone made it a lot easier for them. If you get to this position where that bead can't go on, we try to not use tire levers when replacing a tube as much as possible, because the chance of pinching that brand new, not broken tube with your tire lever is high. So we want to avoid that as much as possible. But if you do need to use a tire lever, what I always try to do is really push that tube up and in and make sure it's out of the way, and I'm not going to puncture it with my tire lever. All right, so another part of this is to take that valve and push it up and in like that. And that's to avoid all of that mass around the tube getting pinched. Then I'm going to visually inspect all the way around and make sure that the tube is up inside the tire and not poking out underneath that bead. And I'm going to do that on this side as well. So you can see, all you see there, the tube is up inside the tire. So I shouldn't have an issue here. But you do want to double check, because you don't want some tube to be sticking out and then not be able to inflate it. All right, now I'm going to reinflate, and I'm going to start by kind of looking and seeing that this says right by the size of the tire, it also says 110 psi. That's the maximum tire pressure that air pressure that this tire and tube with the rim can withhold. So I'm going to take a look, if you want to zoom in on the pump here. The large black letters are the tire pressure, and so initially I'm only going to pump the tire up to maybe 30 or 40. And the reason I'm going to do that is if a tube is getting pinched, or if the bead is for some reason not on the rim correctly, I'd rather find that out at 40 psi than 100 psi when it explodes in my face. All right. So I'm just going to put a little bit of pressure. And at this time I'm making sure nothing's poking out or being weird. And you can hear some sounds, which is that bead pushing into the rim. All right, so now I'm going to take a look. Again, I'm visually inspecting, and what I'm looking at is all these edges here. I just want to make sure a tube isn't poking out or getting pinched. And it looks good, so I'm going to continue to pump. So although the tire says it can withstand 110 pounds of pressure, I'm probably going to go somewhere around 90, because I don't really like to ride that rigid of tire pressure, and it will be more comfortable. Some things to take into account when you are accounting for tire pressure is the application. So usually mountain bikes tires run a lower tire pressure, and then you also would take into account the weight of the rider. So in terms of the cycling world, I'm definitely not a small cyclist, and your rear tire and tube take the brunt of your weight. So I always make sure that this tire pressure is adequate enough to withhold my weight sitting on the seat. So I would probably go a little bit higher on that. Bigger riders have to take that into account, and then lighter riders can actually ride a lower tire pressure. All right. Some people have been surprised how hard this is, how hard it is to get that tire pressure up there, and it is difficult. It is a challenge even for me, and I've had to sometimes put all my body weight into that. And this is the #1 reason why a floor pump is a necessary part of your home toolbox, because getting to that tire pressure with a hand pump is next to impossible. All right, so I'm going to do a last kind of visual inspection, and what I want to look for is that line that goes all around the tire, making sure it's evenly distributed around the rim. because what that means is the bead is seated correctly back into the wells of the rim. And I won't have any issues with any more flats being caused by any sort of pinching of that. All right, so now I put that nut back down so no air can go in or out. And then the last part here, this little cap, really the only purpose this serves is to make sure mud, dirt, and debris protect that kind of fragile part of the valve there by having a cap on there. And now, another part that often can be found to be difficult, especially with the rear, but is reinstalling your tire, your wheel, onto your bike. So, this is a disc brake bike, so I have to get that rotor in between those brake pads and make sure, you can see I'm using my leg here. Most people don't have the benefit of a stand when they're working on their bicycle, but doing this upside down in this case might actually be a little bit easier. All right, and then Steve, if you get this side, when I re-put this, this quick release back on, I'm going to make sure that the lever is pointed up. And the reason I do that is I want to make sure that if there were to be any issues, it's a lot easier to tell if you're used to your lever being up and I look down and this is pointed to the ground, that means something has come loose. And so this is a good habit to get into, is always pointing your tire levers or your quick release levers up, or at least in a direction you're used to seeing. And that's that. What questions do we have?
Mona has a comment that says that a lot of the wider tires are easier to get on and off, which is good, new and modern,
Yeah.
which is awesome, rather than the older like 23s and 25s.
Absolutely.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Just some comments, some good feedback.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great. Well, if you have any ideas for the next virtual class you would like to see, feel free to either comment in the Facebook event that we have or comment here. We have some ideas for some different ones, but we are definitely open to your ideas and times of day that work better for you. We aren't sure that during the day or evening is better or worse. I know a lot of people are home right now regardless, so we wanted to get this information to you. I know as well that people are preparing for the Ironman still and would need a lot of this information in order to compete. So feel free to share this information with people you know. And the only way to make this easier, make it faster, and make it better is to practice. The first time I tried to do this, I cried. And then I realized I can do it, and it's going to be okay. And a few of those tips and tricks helped me make this continually easier. So for us, it's become sort of second nature, but it's okay if it's challenging. It's okay if it's frustrating initially. It does get easier.
I have one story to tell about this whole related thing, which is I was riding my bike across California and got a flat, and one thing I didn't pay attention to when I bought my tube was the length of the valve. And so certain deep dish wheels require a longer valve, and so like this wheel has, that rim is I would call moderately deep, but a standard like 32 millimeter valve or 40 millimeter valve may not fit through there. And so you want to make sure that when you buy new tubes that the valve length is adequate for the depth of your rim. And so don't be like me and get stuck on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere and not have the right valve length to fit into your tire or into your rim. Yeah. So just be conscious of that. But otherwise, yeah. Oh, Jason has a question, which is, do we still have Basque?
Yes, we do.
For delivery, Jason.
And we can deliver. Yeah, we'll send out an e-bike to get it to you even faster.
And Melissa Carr wants to know if this will be available for playback, and I think so.
I think that is a really good question. Since this is our first time, I do think it saves and uploads to Facebook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And we are always, always, always happy if we have the ability, which means we are more than one person in here, and there's not 50 other people in here, which right now that's not going to happen. We are happy to show you how to do this, especially after our social distancing ends. We can walk you through this process. We're happy to do that if we are able to. There's many people that I've just said, come to the back and let's work on this together. It's just helpful to have someone point out things that are kind of troubleshooting as you're doing it. So definitely reach out if you want more hands-on work. once we're able to. All right, thank you
Awesome.
all so much. We are going to schedule more of these, and like I said, we're open to suggestions, and we are open to suggestions of topics and time frames. So thank you all so much.
Cool.